Welcome to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and my great partner, Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. There's lots of us on the screen tonight.
Yeah, this is great. I'm really delighted to welcome the dynamic duo from Toets Revolutie. We've got Valentina Devid. Hello, Valentina.
Hello.
And René Kneyber, who's the other half of the partnership.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Emma. Hey.
Well, it's not just the two of you as a team. You have a whole team, don't you, at Toets Revolutie? And for people who, can tell people about it, but they're a Dutch education partnership and have produced what I think is one of the most interesting and powerful models for thinking about teaching and learning of recent times, which I think I'm right in saying is called Formative handling. Is that right?
Very good. I think that's a 10 for sure.
It's almost like I'm reading it out. Or to use the English, formative action. And we really want to talk about that because it's, having bigged it up and saying it's one of the most useful and powerful ideas, I think we should really get into it. But let's start off by giving you a chance to tell people a little bit about Toets Revolutie and where you've come from in terms of developing this idea, and then we'll talk about the detail of it. So I don't know, Valentina, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. Well, it actually started more with René than with me. So René was already diving into this topic for quite a long time, like for 10 years before we actually met. And he was researching this topic and implementing it in his own lessons quite successfully. And then we met, and René actually didn't want to work with somebody else. So he was not fond of working with other people. Sorry, René.
It's actually true.
Yeah. He was a bit hesitant, but I don't know. We found each other in this topic, and we, together with Dominique Sluismans, another colleague of us, we started this cooperation about affirmative action. And now we're with so many more people. I can't keep up with how many people we got right now. We're like 26 or something, and still people are also joining us. And now we specialized in effective professional development around formative action and curriculum design. And I think we're doing quite well. René, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so basically I started with formative assessment in 2010, and I was one of the first teachers in Holland to actually use it. Nobody else had heard of it, and I was reading about it and was looking for ways to improve my teaching, and I found out later that in the UK and in Sweden everybody had picked up on formative assessment around 1998, but in Holland we were really slow, like it really blew over us. And I was one of the first to start, and luckily, that gave us a good position because we learned from all the mistakes everybody else made, and we saw, like, there's this wonderful book called Assessment for Learning: The Challenge of Implementation, which showcases all the issues there were with implementing formative assessment in lots of other countries, not just the UK, but also in France and Switzerland and New Zealand, for example. And that really, got me thinking on, okay, what can we do to adapt the model and adapt the thinking to make sure teachers actually use it in the classroom? Because one of the alarming statistics I read about was that, in England, there was a really big push to have formative assessment in classrooms. But only 25% of teachers these days, only 25% of teachers use one strategy at the most. So, and I think we can do better. So that's why I started tweaking on the model and the thinking about, and we came up with a new name because we felt formative assessment was a bit distracting in a way because people think of assessment, and we wanted teachers to think about action. So that's why we came up with the term formative action. And we started experimenting with models. And Well, and basically that all got out of hand, as Valentina said. It's a, you know, it's really successful in terms of a CPD company. There's a lot of demand for what we do in Holland, and so now we have about 26 colleagues, you know, doing CPD all across Holland, and basically it's not enough. So we started a month ago with, you know, with trying to get new schools for the new school year, and already we're full. And
wow, amazing.
Yeah.
So just to sort of to frame that then, so you've got this concept of formative action, which we're going to get into, but you also support schools directly to implement it. So another part of the discussion, if we get to it, is to talk about that part, because it's one thing to have an idea. And am I right in thinking the book, you're about to publish a book explaining formative action, has that come out yet, or is it coming out soon?
Coming out soon, yeah. So it's coming out. We wrote a book in Dutch and we made a translation. That's coming out at the end of April or the start of May. And basically, what the book does is explain the concept really well. So
that's what we heard.
Yeah.
In terms of the translation, I mean, I'm just reaching back here to pick up. I think it's worth saying that René got the ball rolling with doorlopers, which is the Dutch translation of walkthroughs.
Yeah.
And every time I want to feel like I really know Dutch, I just pick up the book and I just read out a section. Oh, passen verschillende voorbeelden bieden elk. And I just think it's great. Hearing your words that you wrote in another language that you don't understand is
well, one of the issues translating that book, because I translated the first version, or the yellow version as we call it, and one of the issues we have is that Dutch is a more wordy language than English, so you need a lot more words to say the same thing. And but you know, you made like a really strict like panels and 5 steps, so we had to cut some content out of your book. I'm sorry, but yeah.
I love this. I love the fact that you could have put anything, René, and Tom wouldn't have known. You could have written anything you liked.
But the teachers have, and it's something which is, you know, pretty phenomenal thing, which is it's sort of independent from you. I know this, but as a group called Leerkracht, who basically bought the rights to doorlopers they made a website and videos and stuff, and there's a whole platform which is completely free to all the teachers in Holland. So literally every teacher can access all this stuff. And I think that's pretty awesome. So, you know, and a lot of schools are then doing training using that idea. So we're obviously very happy about that, and it's exciting. But it's as always impressive that you guys can engage with us in not your first language speaking it better than we do, which is really...
Oh, you're getting close, Tom.
Yeah, you're getting close. You're getting pretty good. So
Emma's nearly there too. She's getting better all the time.
5-word sentences now.
Exactly, it's impressive. So let's get into it. So I saw you do this talk at a research shed in London a couple of years ago, and it really struck me the journey that you went on with this. So formative assessment, as described by Dylan William and others, has this word assessment in it, and you felt that was problematic. And so you got into this formative action. And I think, you know, in the time we have, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say what the 5 steps are, because beautifully, like all good things, they come in 5 steps. And Oliver, that appeals to him. So but then what I'm going to ask you to do is describe them but I'll list them all first so people got a framing. So essentially, formative action, you've sort of broken it down into these five steps. So the first one is orient and predict. That's number 1. The second one is thinking and generating. Then we go into interpret, communicate, and decide. And that's a kind of decision-making point in a lesson. Then we go to the action, informed follow-up action. So you kind of like, you go from deciding and then doing something is the action is key. And then finally, verify, reflect, and predict. And so they've got these 5 steps. It's quite distinct, but of course there's a flow. So it'd be interesting to get your sense of kind of what's happening there, and so to get this idea of formative action. It's not just like a loose phrase that you've tossed into the world. It's a process that you've thought about, and it's got structure to it. So let's go through it. What I don't know who wants to start. Valentina, let's hear you. What's orient and predict mean? What's that bit about? Why is that so important?
I actually love that first step because I think that first step was missing from other models that were already exist. And the first step is, yeah, where should I start? It's all about getting focus as a teacher, like orienting, what are my learning goals, what are my learning objectives, where am I in the learning process with my learners, with my students, and then also thinking like, what do I want to investigate? What do I want to research of that learning process? What do I want to know? What am I curious about? What are typical misconceptions? And that thought process is so crucial that you really take time also in the beginning, like to really think of that very consciously. And I think that is really missing from other steps. And it helps so many teachers that we noticed that it helps really with teachers also implementing it more successfully in their classroom, because lots of times when trouble comes up or, you know, stuff doesn't go so well, it all has to go back, or you always have to go back to that first step. Like, did you have enough focus? Did you know what you were really curious about? What kind of information you want to elicit from your students? So that first step is a mental step. So it happens inside your head as a teacher. So no activity has happened yet. And that's also what's really important about this, that you really have to have a clear a thought process about this. And then also not only like deciding where to focus on, but also what is my prediction. So if I'm going to investigate if my students know the causes of the First World War, what do I predict that they know? What would I predict that they will answer? And also that prediction really helps you with already thinking it more, you know, through. Like, okay, if I predict that the answers will be like this, when will I be happy with those answers? When will I be content? Or what if the answers will go, you know, below the mark, below the bar, not what I'm looking for? And what should I decide then to do? So it really helps in that first step. All these thought processes you have to be really specific about and be actually quite explicit as well.
But
and
how
then
does that link to the idea of this idea that you write about sense of quality?
Yeah, well, let me add first to what Valentina said, is that one of the hardest parts about formative action is actually getting to the action part. So and what we found out is that if you do that step one properly, you really think about the misconceptions you're about to find, or or the things you consider that would go wrong, it's a lot easier to get into action. So because if you're surprised by the results of your assessment or formative assessment by your students, then it's very hard to actually get into the action part. Yeah. But
I noticed that one of the things that I did last year was I came to visit you with Oliver, and well, we looked. I mean, I got some training sessions that were run after school, and teachers were sort of demonstrating this to us, and they all talked about sense of quality. It was a phrase they used a lot, and this idea cut through to them, that knowing what you're looking for, what does good look like, what does an excellent outcome look like. And to me, that was just such an important notion, that we have that sense of quality in our mind. We're doing formative assessment in our version of it, but the formative action is related to achieving a goal which has a sense of a standard to it. And if you're not sure what that is, you don't know how to reference the information you're getting and evaluate it properly. So that to me is an interesting idea. And I guess in a lot of the feedback conversations I have with teachers, it's the bit where that's where the discussion comes down to. What were you looking for? What would a good answer have been? What an excellent answer would have been? And to capture it in that phrase, sense of quality, I think is really smart.
Yeah, so the book, we've called it Formative Action from Instrument to Design. And what you're describing is what we call constructive alignment. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get alignment between the goal and the particular like achievement that you're looking for. So if you're not clear, you can be clear about the learning goal or the learning objective, but if you don't have a sense of what an actual achievement looks like, you know, when is it good enough, then you lose a lot of focus in your lessons. So you know, the step one is to us like an addition to what other people have done. But we feel it's very important because actually, like you describe, is like the entire design thinking, make sure that the formative action works or doesn't work.
Is there an anticipatory element to that first step as well then, that you are sort of thinking, okay, this is where I do want to go, but what am I going to do? What other routes have I thought about before I get going? So it's like the sitting and thinking, right, I do want to go from A to B, but we might have to go from A to B via A1 or A2 or A3. And it's anticipating that before you start and have thought through what you're going to do before you've got there. So you're kind of reducing that thinking that you might have to do on your feet later on in the process, because you've almost anticipated and thought it through and acted it through in your head before you've even started.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And yeah, we also see just what René said, is that because we make it so explicit and also train teachers in that thinking process, then exactly what you just said, it helps, you know, when you're in the classroom and you have all the students in front of you and you see the answers coming in, and yeah, it's always also a bit of stressy situation because you have to decide quite quickly what is the best step, we know the best decision to make, what's the best informed follow-up action. So it really helps you, and especially when you start with this, because when you're more like a novice also in the whole formative action part, it can be a bit overwhelming also, because when you do this for the first time, when you see the answers, I remember when I did this for the first time, I had no clue yet what my students would answer. So also the whole prediction part, you know, anticipating on what they would react was really hard for me because I had no clue. So I did this at the end of the lesson then because that was easier. I tweaked it because the first time I was like, oh my God, what are all these answers? What should I do now? And just like René said, I stopped. So I didn't do anything. So I saw all the answers. I felt overwhelmed and I stopped. I didn't know what to do. So then I thought, okay, I will do this in the last 10 minutes of my lesson. And I will collect the answers and, you know, analyze it in my own time, interpret it in my own time, and also make the decision of how to move forward, how to move on. And then I started the next lesson with, you know, talking about the answers. And I already had in my head, okay, this is going to be the informed follow-up action. But I think that in step one of the really important parts is that you have to anticipate, have to predict like what the answers will be, and also where is the bar? Where is the, you know, when are you want to know what success also looks like. So you have to be really specific, like, okay, maybe if 80% of my students have this wrong or correct, how do I move on? You have to make that clear for yourself.
I think it's interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like when I visited you that quite a lot of the work that the schools had done and you had done with them early on was to actually do this sort of quite broad curriculum road mapping. So this orient and predict is like looking quite wide lens and saying like, here's the curriculum, here's the journey we're on. And so that you've got as reference points for what happens next. Okay, so this is where we need to go. This is what we're trying to do. And starting with a view of that end goal, working back to the lesson you're about to teach and knowing where it sits on that. And that sounds grand, but in fact, if you've never really, if you're going into a lesson thinking, I'm just doing this, you know, quite head down, you can not get it right. And I was discussing this with yesterday, this really specific thing of, for experienced teachers, you learn this doesn't matter so much to know this now because there's a kind of maturation. It's a bit like a picture, which is, you know, pixelated, but it's kind of there. But over time, it will get in more and more detail. And eventually, it will all become clear. But that's fine. It's fine to be a bit fuzzy now. But other things are more like building blocks. If I don't build it now, the whole thing's gonna fall down. So I need to know this. No, this really matters, and this is something which can develop over time. And knowing that is one of the hardest things. But that orientation aspect to me is it builds in the curriculum thinking into the formative assessment model. Let's move on though. That's number one. We've got.
Well, the interesting point here is that, you know, when you think about the grand scheme that you're working in, is one of the things we do in our thinking and also in our book is that the main objective is always student independence. So you want your students to become independent in something. And that also means something for the way you set up your formative action, like during like a chapter or during a couple of weeks. Because when you start off, you want to do more checks for understanding. You know, you don't want to do more checking for prior knowledge. But when you move more towards that main goal of independence, then you start using more feedback, and you also start organizing your feedback in such a way that your role lessens and the student's role increases. So basically what you're looking for at the end of like a chapter is that the students do most of the thinking and most of the acting, and you're just organizing it for your students.
Yeah, that's so their awareness of the journey is key. It's totally explicit to them. So there's step two then. So you got the map, kind of know where we are, and you're anticipating. But now we have to get them doing stuff. So it's very simply just called thinking and generating. And in the translation of your own article, it says the student is encouraged or encourages themselves to think about something and to make this thinking observable by generating something. So I like this idea that, you know, they might be doing stuff, but as a teacher, you can't deal with stuff you can't see. So you have to generate observable acts, which then give evidence of the learning and so on. So that's interesting. And to me, this is, and it, more or less explicitly, but I like to underline it kind of all the way through, is all. Like, you're teaching a class, so therefore you need them all thinking and all generating observable information. Otherwise, they're not all involved, I guess. So what I don't know, René, do you want to go first on this one? What's the key element to this, do you think?
Well, what we try to do in our model is actually only put in steps that you need to have an effective process. So every step we have is something that you need in order to make it fully work. And with the second step, it's absolutely important to engage everybody to get stuff going, like the test effect. So we know from like research is that it's good to engage everybody, make sure everybody thinks, but also everybody generates, because when you feel like you have to generate something, it encourages you to think more. So but I think the main, like, those things are important. What also is important is that during step two, students feel safe enough to actually show you their thinking. Like, they need to know that what they like put on a mini whiteboard or they fill in some kind of quiz, that it won't be used against them later on. So they always should feel like, even if I don't know, I'm going to write something down. And that is something, of course, that takes time, and you need to do it like more often and more structurally. But I think the second step is actually like a very short step, but very important for the effectiveness, is that you make sure everybody's silent, everybody does it for themselves before they start, you know, interacting with each other.
So Emma, I mean, that's a kind of like, I'm picturing a class of mini whiteboards and stuff like that. I mean, is that, what do you think? I mean, how, I don't, because we also have this primary secondary discussion, but thinking and generating, we're all students. It's sort of like the bread and butter of a lot of lessons, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's that generating bit can be so different in different subjects, different age groups, but it's that because learning is invisible, if you can't flip the children's heads open and have a little stir around and see what sense are you making of this, then unless you're asking them to generate something that you can see that's observable, you're just kind of guessing, aren't you? And I'm just thinking with primary, we'll do a lot of kind of responses where the children have to point to something or vote with something or show you their fingers but they are heavily involved in giving you that information that you need to take that action with, and they might not be at a level yet where they can generate a full sentence to show you or generate a really difficult answer to something, but you can still have them generate their response to you and share it with you in different ways. And I think sometimes that step isn't given enough emphasis potentially in terms of everybody having to generate something and contribute to that kind of collective response in the classroom.
Yeah, I write about this stuff all the time, that all versus some. And do you think then, Valentina, that when the students are generating, it's obviously for them to be learning, like the testing effect and then rehearsing, but in terms of providing information to the teacher, you do sometimes have to then sample. So this may be, and I found this when I was talking about this before, step 2 quickly leads into step 3. Because as soon as information is being generated, you have to do the step 3, which is interpret, communicate, and decide. You have to look at what you've been presented with and start thinking, okay, what does this mean? And if that's not sampling the room, and it's just a small, you can make a false choice. And which I love the language there. So when you're getting the children to generate in step 2, it's explicitly knowing that the next thing you're going to do is react to it and interpret it. So it's got to be based on the collective, not just the kids who are the most confident and that type of thing. So do you want to talk us through your view of this third step, interpret, and decide?
Yeah, well, lots of stuff happens in the third step, I guess. So exactly what you just said. So this is the moment where, well, you and your students, well, and that's also why I like Oliver did like the hump. It goes up when people look it up. Tom, you also blogged about the model, so people can look it up maybe. But Oliver Cavioli made our model as well. And if you look at the model, step 3 is above the other steps. And I think it's also a bit like you step a bit out of yourself or out of the process. You're still in the process, of course, but you hover above it more. And you as a teacher and also your students look at the answers and do some sense making, like, okay, what do we see here? What happened? And is there stuff that's really obvious right now? Or do we have more like follow-up questions? Maybe you as a teacher want to ask some questions to clarify some of your answers of your students because you don't understand them yet, or you're curious about something. So I really love also step 3. So this is the moment that you try to make some sense of all the answers that you just collected. So you try to interpret them. And also this is the moment where you communicate. So this is also the moment where you can give feedback to your students, and maybe they can give feedback to each other. So they can give peer feedback. Maybe they can make their answers more complete. Or again, you can ask like follow-up questions. And this is also the moment that you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision how to move on. And you want to make, of course, a good decision, like a logical decision based on the information. So the decision should be like a logical follow-up of the stuff that you just saw, and think maybe, okay, like 60% got it right, 40% still are struggling. Maybe I have to differentiate a bit now. So maybe the 40% of my students who were still struggling, I will reteach, or we will practice more in the 4th step. So again, you just said, Tom, like 2 follows up 3 very shortly, but also 3 and 4 really you go really quickly from 3 to 4 as well. Of course, it differs from how much time you want to spend also on the feedback part, but you can also make that like really short. It all depends also like, again, if you're doing this in primary or higher education, or like also your subject, but we try to learn our teachers that this should be like a very fluid, or, you know, very, very quick process. So it shouldn't take you very long. Of course, sometimes you have a very important topic. This whole process can maybe take you like 20 minutes if you want to, but it can also happen like in a minute and a half, or in 5 minutes, or in 7 minutes. So it differs, and it's not like a straitjacket. But that's the whole idea of step 3. So you collect the information, you look at it, you talk about it, and you decide how to move on.
This bit fascinates me, Valentina, because I see so many classes and so many lessons where the teacher's done a mini whiteboard thing. The children have all written it on the mini whiteboard. They hold it up. It's flapping like a flock of seagulls. You can just... And all the children have written so much on these whiteboards. And you think, how as the teacher, how have you got time to scan and look at and interpret all of that information in that moment? Which kind of does that have implications then for the things you're asking children to generate for you to make those choices? Because I see so many lessons where the amount of information that the children have generated, the teacher would need to stand there for half an hour and actually kind of... So what makes a great kind of thing to generate to then be able to act on? What's your guidance there?
Well, I think this is also the key, like why we call it formative action and not formative assessment, because what we also saw, like if you still think of it as an assessment, the whole pitfall is that you ask too many questions, or also like they're very big inside, like, you know what I mean? Like very open-ended questions. And of course you can still ask an open-ended question, but the focus is crucial here. So again, in step 1, you really have to have a clear view of what you want to ask your students. Like, what am I really curious about? Is it a typical misconception? Is it like prerequisite knowledge? It can be anything. You can also investigate their self-regulation if you want to, but you have to be really specific. We call it actually a spear fishing. So we have like, I love this part. And what was the other one? It's called
Trawl fishing and spear fishing.
Yeah, thrall. So you shouldn't do thrall fishing, like an assessment, like you ask like way too many questions and you get like all this kind of information, like you just said, like very lengthy answers, and you have to have so much time to interpret everything, and we don't have that. We don't have any time. So it has to be really focused, like spear fishing. So you have to have a really clear view of what you want to know. And the quality of the question also has influence on the quality of the answer. So of course, you know, maybe you can use a different tool. I'm a history teacher, so for me, open-ended questions is a really big thing. And definitely in the Netherlands, we don't do as much as you do in Britain, like with essays. And so we do a lot with open-ended questions and with images that students have to, you know, declare their answer. So I like to use a digital tool that they can answer on that. So I can really scan quickly the answer. And I only ask like one question, but a very important question that I really want to know. And then again, we go back to step 1. So I have to be really sure about that question. That is also the right question to ask.
So this is, I mean, go on, Emma.
No, I was just going to say, because it's the analysis of the answer that the children give you. And I think there's a misconception that just doing something with a mini whiteboard will magically make the learning happen. But actually, it's that kind of the bit where you're doing that really concise and precise analysis of that answer that's the important thing. It's not the process itself, or the, you know, the tool itself in terms of the board. It's actually that thinking and that response that's crucial.
This is what I love about this. And for people, I mean, in some ways, we're just sort of teasing this because it all takes some thinking and to become fluid. So you're thinking about a moment, which is in a matter of moments, you're going from step 1 to 3, you're thinking, okay, I need to know if everybody knows this. Okay, so everybody, here's a question. Show me what your answer is. Right, show me, and that could be show me literally multiple choice ABC on a board, or it could be, can you show me the maths answer, or it could be start writing and I'm going to zoom around and check in to see, are you doing it? Are you doing it? And it could be, can I visually check that you're all doing the dance move that I've just shown you? So it's something discreet enough to check everybody kind of as well as you can, so that you can then decide what to do next. And then you can do, as you come, you can do lots of loops of that. So this isn't like a lesson sequence. This could happen many, many times. And that's why I love it. It's like each one predicts the next move. So you stand back, hover, and this is like for a really mini whiteboard scenario, it's explicitly to see what's put, so that one of your actions might be to reteach it because nobody's got it right, not just to performatively, like you say, waft the board, say. But it also does suggest this thing, like Doglamov and other people like David Dido have written about it, this idea of going around forensically looking at work to see the thing, the spearfishing. Is it happening? Not, oh, how's your work going? It's like, are you doing the thing I've just taught you? Let me see it. And you're looking to specifically see if that's working. And that means you're grazing around the room. I think they call it hunting, not fishing, or whatever. But it's not a trivial thing. And if you have to use a clipboard for it, power to you is what I say. So,
oh, yeah.
But then, like you say, you hover above to see. But then this is the beautiful bit. Something, you have to do something with that information. Hence action, not just assess and like whatever. It's assessed to take action. So René, do you want to, this is, I think, and in the diagram, they have this big arrow just going, landing, do something. It's the whole thrust of the whole concept is step four. It's the action. So tell me, and if this, when you describe this in your research ed, this was like a big moment, like it's not just assessment, which is like, it's action. It's quite critical, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's the whole point. So what usually happens, and what we saw is basically what Emma described just now, is that, you know, when you see teachers becoming surprised by what they see, like they see like this huge wave of mini whiteboards, and you see them stagger like, oh dear, what what am I supposed to do? Then you know something went wrong. So you're trying to think about your formative action in such a way that you can always get to like an action, and we call it, you can also call it a landing space. So you've done a lot of thinking with your group, and you thought about, you know, what should the right answer be, what went wrong, and you're also trying to decide with your group how are we going to move on, and you need to like facilitate that space. So you really need to like what we're really into, like the research of Naomi Winstone, who wrote a lot about designing effective feedback processes. And she always talks about the landing space. It's like, if you have feedback and there is no landing space, then that feedback is not going to get used, because you're saying, well, you've got your feedback and I hope somewhere in the future you'll make good use of it. And people will not make good use of it. So you really need to design like a moment where they can work on the thing they've just learned. So you might have decided, well, somebody needs some extra instruction, or somebody needs to do some more exercises, or a student might think, well, I'm going to revisit my paper or my letter that I wrote and try to improve on it. But there always needs to be like an action that you decided on. Maybe the teacher decided on it, or you yourself as a student decided on it. You actually perform that action. But of course, you never know whether that worked or not. So as a teacher, you say, well, I'm just going to give you some more instruction because I feel you didn't get a good grasp of the concept. And then, but you never know if that's going to work or not. So that's why we have step 5. And in step 5, you check whether that informed action actually worked. And I think the really powerful part about that 5th step that often gets overlooked. So it's very interesting that that's one of the parts most teachers skip, but that's actually when you make a good finish is when, because that's a success experience for your students. You know, they can experience success, which will grow their self-efficacy, because they will have a better understanding of what actions actually work to improve their learning. Like they made a decision on what to do. They did it and it worked or it didn't work. And that teaches them something. But it's also like good for you as a teacher because you can actually check whether the kids are on track and whether they're meeting the goals that meeting the standards that they're working towards. So it's a very powerful, like a finish to the entire process. And it might mean that you have to repeat that process a couple of times because the students didn't get to the level that you wanted to get them to.
It's so brilliantly. It's like I love its combination of obviousness and insightfulness. Because like all good ideas, I think they seem so logical and obvious and common sense, but actually, you wouldn't be making this case and doing all the work if it was already like present in the system. The fact is, it isn't. This is a loop you hear a lot. Okay, so the teacher asks the question. Children don't know the answer, so the teacher just tells them the answer. End. And it's like, or explains it again. And that thing of, so now, like, do you now know what the answer is? That fifth step, it just isn't closed. Like, so, and so you're just hoping by doing some stuff it will stick, but you're not verifying. So that fifth step, verify, reflect, and predict, goes together. So all these, that's what I love about this stuff. It's like, I don't know, without getting too off track here, it's like evolution, you know, where there's a continuum from a primitive species to a more sophisticated one, but there's no point where you could say that the kind of change happens. It's all continuous. And step one, it explains two explains three is because of four. And you're not going to give action without anticipating. You're going to check if the action has been successful. It's just, and once that's in your head as a teacher, thinking, okay, so let's do this now, respond, because I'm then going to check if you got it okay. It's great.
I'm feeling really happy because there's a slide that I use on my training where it's got a picture of a spy and then a picture of the Action Man doll. You know, I don't know whether you have that where you are, but you know, assessment is not just collating information that you secretly take away. Assessment is what action you so great teaching is being like, Action Man, what are you actually going to do now you've got this information. So when Tom sent me this, I was like, oh, it's exactly a much better way of explaining it than and Action Man. But it that's the bit that you see. And I think the bit where you go back to the anticipatory element of that orient and predict is because when you get to that point in the lesson where you've got to take that action, unless you've got a really clear idea of having gone through that process of, if this happens, I will do this. And if that happens, I will do that. When it comes to the point where you have to take action, that's often when you see a lesson become derailed because the teacher isn't confident about, well, what do I do now? I've got this sea of wrong answers or this sea of misconceptions. I haven't actually thought through where I'm going to go, or have the confidence to say, well, my lesson plan was going to take me here, but I need to deviate from it and come and do something different. So I think this is a hugely empowering model for teachers to say, you know, I don't have to do it the way I planned it, because I could go route A, route B, or route C. So I think that's hugely, it's a really empowering model for teachers to say, it might not go how I planned it, so it's okay if it doesn't. My whole job is to respond to it.
But it's also, no, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so I think one of the powerful things as well is that it also helps teachers in their learning process, because you have to make predictions, and so what you sometimes find out is that your predictions are totally off. So what happens with the teachers we train is sometimes they'll write down in their reflection, like, I made predictions and I was so wrong about everything. And that teaches them a lot about the learning of their students. Yeah. So that's also something that might happen, is that they sometimes say, well, I just dropped the entire lesson because I really needed to rethink everything. Yeah.
Teachers need the confidence, need the confidence to be able to do that, to actually say, you know, let's just down tools. This has gone horribly wrong. Let's do something else and leave that for another day. Sorry, Valentina, you were saying.
No, that's fine. That's also why we, in our PD, we actually, all our teachers get homework, what they find hard sometimes. But the first homework that they get is actually designing the 5th step process. So before you're going to teach or before you're going to experiment with formative action, you have to design like all the 5th step, all the 5 steps, like how do you think that you're going to implement this, how you're going to put this into action in your lesson. And I think also that's really empowering, because then you have to think like, okay, if I get these answers and I made this prediction, like the root stuff that you just said, like root A, root B, root C, you have to think of that in before actually like 30 teenagers are in front of you again. And that really helps, because we all know how teaching can be, and it can be really overwhelming, and stuff can happen. Lots of stuff can happen at the same time. So what we see is that it really helps that the teachers have to do this designing in front of the lesson and then try it out, you know, real life with the 30 teenagers in front of you, and then also reflect on that. And then they bring that reflection into the next meeting that we have with them. And then we discuss and talk about that, how it went. And also with the 5th step and what you just said, Tom, well, my own experience when I did this in my classroom is the whole process can be quite humbling as well, because I thought with my best intentions that what I did in step 4 was awesome. that what I did in step 4 was, of course, very good for everybody. So the whole reteaching that I did, or the more practicing that we all did together, that all of them were now meeting the goals, you know, meeting the criteria, that we're all there. And I remember doing the 5th step the first time. So the 5th step is a mirror question of the question that you asked in step 2. So it has to be, you know, the same stuff, the same goal you're testing again, to see like, did everybody improve? Am I now content? Are we meeting the standard? Are we meeting the goals? And then you see like, oh, what I did in step 4 is not good enough for everybody. And that's really humbling, and sometimes also frustrating and painful, and, you know, stuff like that. But it really, you get a better grasp of how learning really happens, and also how much time it sometimes takes. And we don't have that time. So I remember also, I had this topic in my lessons, and it was modern imperialism. And I did this topic with 14-year-olds, and it's a very hard topic in history. And I thought, okay, every lesson I'm going to ask in some way about this concept, modern imperialism. And my prediction was like, okay, maybe the 3rd time or the 4th time I'm going to ask about this again, they will all get it. But I was so wrong. I was so wrong. And it was so frustrating for me, but I learned so much. I learned that it takes a lot of time. And if you want, you know, mastery, if you want that all your students can grasp this concept, then you also have to make time for really important goals in your curriculum. And that's also what we do in the second part of our training, and what you also talked about a bit earlier, Tom, though you have to also zoom out, like, and take a look at your curriculum as well.
It's not kids just don't nail it straight away, and it's one of those things that's sort of satisfying when everyone's got it, but the fact is that they won't immediately. And so part of the verification, and it says reflect and predict, it's sort of like planning like the next loop. So you're thinking, okay, we've got so far, that's cool. Okay, so taking stock, and then sometimes this could be planning to the next lesson, it could be the next 5 minutes. And I think the time scale for this process is so interesting. So it chimes in with one of my favorite techniques in our walkthroughs world is short feedback loops, because I feel like sometimes teachers teach too much at once, then there's too many things to check, then there's too many things to reteach, and there's too much divergence in the class. But if you're just saying like, well, can everyone do this? Let's have a look. Boom. Okay, we deal with that. It's a little nugget. And then you can deal with it more precisely. And then you might do 2 or 3 of those and then add them into something bigger. It's because otherwise you just can't handle the information. And you also can't decide where to go next because you've got so many different competing parameters. But so I think to be honest with you, when I could geek out over this for about another 2 hours, which we don't have.
I've only just started, Tom. I could be here for days.
I just think it's so insightful, and what I love about it is, we're talking about just regular lessons here. It's not sort of some like scientific breakthrough or something, but it's just describing the thing that you've always tried to do as a teacher in such a clear way. I just think it's helpful. It's kind of intellectually rigorous, which is very satisfying, but it's also practical and it's very human. So you're really getting the children this whole idea of agency and independence. So one of the loops might be teacher-led, like I'm asking you this, you show me this, I'll tell you what to do, and I'm going to check. But the other, it could be entirely student-led. So have a think. How did you get on? What do you need to do now? Did you succeed? And it's that brilliant thing. It's the same model works to be student-led or student-led, teacher-led or student-led. And it's once you see that possibility that this is fostering independence, it's yeah. This is great. And I can't recommend it to people enough. I think I've probably made that clear. But, yeah, look, so I think we have to stop now because we're coming to the end of our time. And I just wanted to say congratulations on the work, and it's great to know you and to have had this engagement. And when to people who don't read Dutch, even having read Doorloopjes back to back like I have, but still can't really understand it. When's the English version of this book coming out?
Yeah, so it's coming out at the end of April or the beginning of May. I think it's heading off to the printers this week or maybe next week. And next to the book, we also have a website on formativeaction.com where we post blogs about like niche subjects that we geek out about. So for example, we just released like a blog about a poster by a Dutch researcher and that poster is aimed at helping students ask better feedback questions. So we have lots of stuff on our site, and we're also going to, when the book is released, we'll also have like a free online course to explain every step of the model for everybody to better understand, what it looks like in practice, what you could do to design it, and hopefully help teachers, not just in Holland, with how to do this in lessons.
Yeah, well, that sounds awesome. So yeah, thanks again. And the blogs, I mean, the translate features on the web, on the internet, you just read everything on there. It's superb. So look, thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed running through your idea again.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having
brilliant.
us.
Oh, it's lovely to meet you. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, well, I hope to see you again in the UK before long, and it's been brilliant. So thanks to everyone listening to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe. It's nice to have a bit of international input into the show. Thanks again to everyone listening. As we always say, we're very excited by the reach that the podcast is getting, and someone emailed me just yesterday from Australia, geeking out about one of our episodes, and I just think that's great. So thank you to everyone listening from around the world, and we'll see you again really soon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner, and I've been presenting with my co-host Tom Sherrington. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, share on social media, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel, search for Mind the Gap with Tom and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership, and our producer for today's episode was Luke Kemper.